Hey, I'm Bradley Zordriger, and welcome to Overkill Unearthed, where we go and dig up the past, put it on this table, and then talk about it. And thank God for that, because otherwise, I never would have got to review this album, because it came out way before I was covering music in any kind of professional sense. I think the only thing I was doing was probably talking to my friends about it on MSN Messenger. But before we get to talking about that album, I have to remind you that we would really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel, and if it's within your means, we would love to have you join our Patreon campaign so we can continue doing this bigger and better forever. Back in the day, the Orange County metalcore scene was huge, and these guys would become the biggest success story out of all of that when they decided to ditch the metalcore thing and go full heavy metal, like on this album.
City built of gold, a far cry from innocence. There's more than meets the eye around here. Look to the waters of the deep. A city of evil.
This week we're going back to 2005 for Avenged Sevenfold's City of Evil album, which came out on June 6th of that year via Warner Brothers Records. I was already into Avenged Sevenfold based off their previous album, Waking the Fallen, which, as I hinted at previously, had more of a metalcore sound. I feel that this album, City of Evil, was received perhaps better by critics than fans, at least at first. The drastic shift away from anything core-related was a shock, as was the elimination almost entirely of screaming. Theories abounded, like that vocalist M. Shadows had blown his voice, but the band's producer on this album and the previous one, Mudrock, came out and said that when he first met the band, they told him that they had always planned to be like this. They had planned one album of full screaming, one that was half screaming and half singing, and then they were going full steam on singing, moving ahead. As for the critics, I remember reading one review or blurb about this album where they mentioned that usually when an album comes out, they get a press advance. They get their own special copy, usually with the barcode, like, hole punched out. But they loved this album so much that they went and spent their hard-earned dollars to get a real, not press, copy, which is high praise coming from a notoriously broke profession. Or maybe back in 2005, music journalists weren't as broke. I don't know. I was 15. Now, I'm pushing 30, and it's time to see how my feelings of this album have grown, changed, shifted, whatever. In doing research for this, aka looking at reviews to get the general consensus for what the world felt this album was when it came out, I kept seeing comparisons to Guns N' Roses. And I just wanted to start out this album by saying, what is that about? Because Seize the Day is a power ballad and it borrows a little bit from that band's sound, or because M. Shadows says, "Sweet child, will miss you and burn it down." Like, I feel like those comparisons are given way too much weight in what's going on in this band's sound. Speaking of that song, Burn It Down, it was the first song written for this album and the first single to be released, and I can see why. With its chugged opening and the guitar harmonies that follow, and with a breakdown plus a main thrashy riff, it's the closest thing that we get to their previous metalcore sound. It really is a good transition song. Okay, so I'm not going to totally waste that Guns N' Roses comparison. The fact that anybody could compare a once metalcore band to Guns N' Roses shows really how far this band has come and what the growth was between album 2 and 3. Though the actual breadth of influences that the band use here are much wider than just Appetite for Destruction. I know I just said Burn It Down is the closest thing that you get to a metalcore song here, and there's a close contender. The Wicked End has these almost melodic death metal riffs. They kind of bridge the gap from the metalcore sound they were to the more thrash-inspired sound here. It's kind of like how Spirit in Black by Slayer was like a precursor to the Gothenburg riff. Seriously, go listen to it and then listen to At the Gates and tell me you don't hear the seed planted there. It's as close as we get to an Unholy Confession sequel on this album. Yes, there is a hefty thrash inspiration here, most often in rhythm, both guitars and the rhythm section, including the drums. Take, for example, Trash and Scattered, which gallops but pulls on the reins just early enough to leave some space in the pre-chorus for some driving bass lead from Johnny Christ. Actually, he gets some space coming out of the chorus too. That song's choruses lead is indicative of like arguably the main influence going on here, the new wave of British heavy metal. Yes, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, etc. harmonies abound all over this album. This is especially the case on album opener Beast and the Harlot, which basically just shreds the entire time. Tastefully though. Talking about shredding, it basically goes without saying that the solos rip, right? Well, I'm just gonna say it anyways. The solos rip. They're the perfect level of melodic, using everything from dual harmonies, sweeps, taps, and everything else thrown in. Again, tastefully. What's most impressive is how everything flows. On Beast and the Harlot, they get out of the bridge and then they get to this song's outro by playing the chorus once standard and another time with a key change. I noticed that before, but I didn't understand that the purpose was to get you from there to there until I watched this breakdown video that the band does on their YouTube channels where they literally go through like all the tracks and explain stuff, and I thought that was a creative way to get there. Bat Country is another example of a song that flows remarkably well for one that maybe shouldn't. You know, it just got an acoustic break that comes out of nowhere. Then this build up really builds up with the Rev's creative drumming right into a guitar solo. And then they just go right back into the verse section, which they baited you with. You know, instead of going to the verse section, they went into the acoustic section and they just put it right at the end of the solo. They kind of just threw this whole break in there that was like acoustic session, solo, boom, we're right back into the song. And you didn't mind it one bit. In fact, you probably really liked it. I really liked it. There's even like this like flamenco section closing out Sidewinder, which was played by Sinister Gates' dad and himself. It's the fact that it's not too far out there is damn impressive. And what's even more so impressive is the fact that they made a song where the riffing sounds like the titular snake, a Sidewinder, kind of slithering through the fucking sand. And they snuck in some neoclassical riffing there too, which reading interviews, watching interviews, I remember the band referencing that they wanted to compete with Children of Bodom levels of shredding here. And hey, if you're gonna throw neoclassical into your metal, that's pretty much one of your main influences. Now, there's one thing that impressed me more now than when the album came out, and that is the drumming of the Rev. Back when the album came out, as I said, I was fairly young, I was 15. So to me, good drumming equals fast drumming. And that's still the case a lot of the time. I still love fast drumming, but the Rev was just so creative in how he played, and it shows all over this album. Case in point, check out the extended fill just before the halfway point in Blighted and Changed. That whole song absolutely rips, but that part alone just makes it for me. And I really wish Dylan was here so I could be like, hey, play it on the desk with your fingers right now so that everybody can hear it. But I'll wait. Go listen to that drum fill. Come back. A relatively straightforward song like Bat Country, it was the single that really broke this band, is made so much more interesting by his subtle playing that just elevates sections that would be cool to very fucking cool. And he also has a mid-song fill there. So maybe there's something going on here. When he gets a mid-song fill, the song gets that much better. Worst parts. Avenged Sevenfold is influenced by Dream Theater. In fact, they would get Mike Portnoy to play on the album after the Rev passed. But towards the last third of this album, they kind of lean away from the heavier side of that band and more towards their like overwrought bombast. The second half of The Wicked End, love the first half, but the second half is a little too Danny Elfman. Seriously, like you can hear Edward Scissorhands there, like when they're going up on the house on the hill or whatever. You can hear that shit there. And the song Strength of the World is like too hopeful sounding, plus the contrast in the chorus between the gang vocals and M. Shadow's nasally voice really just highlights how nasally it actually is. Plus the gang vocals are kind of not powerful. So it feels like a weak chorus. To the band's credit though, in an interview, one of them recently said that the choruses on this album are weak. And while I disagree with that overall, they did specifically point to this one. So hey, at least they can see their own flaws and are aware of them. I guess another tease that I get here is sometimes instances remind me of earlier Avenged Sevenfold material, but without the bite. M. Shadow's croon and the accompanying acoustic guitars about a third of the way through Strength of the World reminds me of a note that he hits in Reminiscence, and it just makes me want to listen to that song. Same thing with MIA with a part in I Won't See You Tonight Part 2. While that song's closing is very much melodramatic, it also reminds me of previous outing Waking the Fallen in its overall tone. So hey, not all is lost. Now we're on the verdict. We're on the verdict. This album marks a special time in Avenged Sevenfold's discography, as they were able to hold on to a few key elements from their goth-tinged metalcore days that I believe were crucial to its success. There is a punk-infused energy going on here. And in one of those breakdown videos for The Beast and the Harlot, they talked about how there's a beat that would traditionally be played in as a thrash riff, and it was given more of the punk treatment. That's where they're coming from, and I think that energy was crucial to separating this from the albums that would follow, as was there was like a certain darkness here that worked really well with the themes of the fall of Babylon, Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, just all these cynical takes on humanity. As proof of that, take the song Afterlife from their next album, the self-titled album. That song is awesome and catchy, but it is not dark at all. And as far as the punk thing, take a song like A Little Piece of Heaven off their next song, which says goodbye to anything punk and just embraces total whimsical excess. And in doing so, kind of takes the last third of this album, ramps it up to 11, and leaves Brad in the dirt. As I've been re-listening to this album and just discovering things that I missed in the past and influences that maybe went over my head when I was much younger, I've posted a few times on social media about this album actually rips, and I've been very pleasantly surprised with the amount of people who comment and be like, what do you mean? Actually, of course it rips. We're well aware of that. I thought there would be a lot more elitist comments being like, ew, fuck that band, ew, fuck that album. There are a lot of people who say their last good album and stuff, and for me, it's the last album that I really loved from this band. So yeah, this was a huge album in terms of getting a lot of people into metal who would maybe then go further down the rabbit hole like I did. You get more heavily into death metal, you get more heavily into grindcore, you get more heavily into black metal, etc., into more extreme metal. And this was the leaping off point for a lot of people. So I don't feel I'm underplaying it when I say that this is the album of Avenged Sevenfold's career. As much as I love Waking the Fallen, this is just a fully realized vision. And I also don't think that I'm underplaying it in saying that it's a hugely important album for metal as a whole. Because of that, I'm going to give this album 4.5 skulls out of 5. As for a shout out, I've got to give it up to 18 Visions, who were another OC metalcore band who kind of moved away from metalcore. In fact, they did it before Avenged Sevenfold did. They didn't go quite as heavy metal. They went more in the rock direction. But as is often the case, the one who takes the risk first isn't the one who fully reaps the rewards. So they didn't make it to the level of success that these guys did. They released an album in 2006 that was just hard rock, and they broke up not that long after. They came back recently. They put out a new album that was more on the metalcore side of things, but I think it's really interesting to watch this band's evolution from proto-deathcore innovators to metalcore innovators to then paving the way for metalcore bands to be like, hey, you know what? We're gonna evolve beyond screaming, and they can do so and succeed in it. 18 Visions deserve better. Go listen to them. Honestly, I could do a full video just talking about Orange County metalcore because I love it so much. That being said, this video was about Avenged Sevenfold, so hit me up in the comments below. What do you think of the band? What do you think about their evolution? What do you think about their transition from sounds? What do you think about this album? And hey, if you love 18 Visions, throw a comment down below too. They deserve it. And I am